Prison feels like a barren tree without any leaves or any branches. It just feels dead. It's a very challenging, very dark, very difficult place. And it's good to probably address that orange is the new black is not what prison looks like. A lot of us will say it could have been me. Like at any moment, that could have been me. And so that I think just being really humble around that, it's not really an us and them. Only 2% are going to do a life sentence. Everyone else is coming out. But when a person comes out of prison, it's kind of like a life sentence, even though they've done the time. She just walked around and chatted to the girls and saw them like human people, like human beings, and without judgment, and just showed them some kindness. Basically, we've been doing that for 80 years. Hi, I'm Amelia Pickering, and this is the Good People Podcast.
It's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here.
Welcome to another episode of the Good People Podcast. My name is Andy, and it's all brought to you by In Other Good News, recorded here in the In Other Good News studio. Have you ever thought about going to prison? What would it be like? How would you deal with it? What would it be like on the inside, and what would you do after you'd served your sentence? Well, this is the topic that I realise that it's not something I've really thought too much about myself. But there are people in this world who are devoting their careers and their time to service that exact need. Mm-hmm. For people within the industry, for people within the prisons, what do they do while they're inside, and what do they do when they're outside? I'd like to introduce today's guest, who's Amelia Pickering, who's the CEO of Prison Network, and she's coming on to the show today to tell us all about exactly what they do, which is to help out these women who are currently and were formerly in prison. Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's really nice to have you on the show because it is a topic that I think that people would be quite interested in, given the fact that a lot of these there's TV shows and things that generate a lot of interest around prison. Mm-hmm. And so, but this is the real thing, and it's real life. And so I wanted to hear what that's actually like. So again, welcome to the show, the prisonnetwork.org.au, by the way. You can go and check out what they do. Do you want to tell us, what does Prison Network do? And then we can dig into the impact that it's making, yeah.
Sure. And, thank you for having me. It is a very polarizing topic. Some people, you'll just kind of see the wall go straight up when you talk about the fact that we work with women in prison, and there's a bit of a, they've done the crime, they should do the time and deal with it kind of thing. And I think there's probably a little bit of misinformation and misunderstanding about how and why women end up in prison. And if in fact they are serving the time based on a number of different factors and what that means for them. So it's a really good topic to talk about. Certainly something that's very important to us is to try and remove some of that stigma for women who've been incarcerated. So Prison Network has been around for a long time. Yeah. They've been going for about 80 years.
Wow.
It started with a young girl who was around 20 years old who wanted to do some good. She was told she wasn't smart enough to do some of the things that she wanted to do initially. So she's like, well, I'll just do good where I am and where I can. She wanted to do some international sort of community aid work. And so she knocked on the door of Pentridge Prison. This is back in the days where there were women in Pentridge and when Pentridge was still operating. And she knocked on the door and the matron came to the door, very different, obviously, to how prison operates now. It's a lot more controlled and restricted, obviously.
Yep.
But the matron answered the door and she said, I think I can come in and do some good here. She was a good person. Yeah. If you could have her on your podcast, that'd be pretty amazing, but she has passed since. And the matron said, yeah, look, come on in, talk to some of the girls who are here and see how you go. And she did that, and she just walked around and chatted to the girls and saw them like human people, like human beings, and without judgment, and just showed them some kindness.
Yep.
And when she left, the matron said, that was pretty good. If you want to come back next week, that'd be all right. We think you add some value here.
Yeah.
And so she did go back the next week and the week after that, and basically we've been doing that for 80 years.
Yeah.
And trying to do just that. That was the inception of it, to go in and to see these women in their humanity, to see the good, the bad, the ugly, but to embrace them nonetheless, and to hope with them and for them that there can be better and that there can be change. And so, bar COVID, of course, we weren't able to do that every week. And so that takes a number of different shapes and forms. We do a lot of support work in prison. So that's one-on-one support work. If a woman would fill out a referral form, for example, while she's in prison, she's able to fill out a form, tick a service, say, I need support in this particular area. And sometimes that'll be asking for support from us, and we'll come alongside her and have some one-on-one time with her and just hear what's happening for her, provide her some information, help her navigate the system inside, start thinking about what it looks like when she leaves. And then we run a number of different programs, engagement programs within prison, so touch points just to bring some hope and support to the woman. And I can get into more of those a little bit later if we have time. But a number of different programs that all have specific outcomes. And then we do the journey sort of what we call through care, so when they're leaving prison, and then do a lot of post-release support, also support work and also programs. So we do work in housing, we do work in employment, and we have a number of recovery groups or recovery programs that help women who are in recovery, and many of the women who are in prison or leaving prison are or have been in recovery from alcoholism or drug addiction or just really damaging relationships. And then the third piece of work that we do that we're really active in is what we call keeping kids connected. And that's obviously trying to sort of provide some support in the fallout that happens when a mum goes to prison. And it's quite a complex area of work. So lots of roadblocks and challenges for mums to stay connected with their kids. And so we provide a whole lot of support around that.
Yeah, that would be a real challenge, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you do have kids, actually you told me something about the likelihood of visitors with mums and kids.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's often when in Victoria, there's around 7,000 children who have a parent who's incarcerated. There's recently been an inquiry into children who have a parent who's incarcerated, and some of the findings have been quite challenging and shocking, particularly in terms of really understanding where these children are, what supports they're getting, what it looks like for them, because there aren't really mechanisms and support structures in place for a child whose parent goes into prison. So, for example, one of the things we know about when a child's parent goes to prison, particularly a mum, is that the research tells us that the kind of trauma or grief that the child experiences is similar to if a parent passed away.
Actually passes away, yeah.
Yeah, because it's that same sort of someone who you love and who cares for you is being ripped out of your life.
Yep.
And so when that happens, when a child's parent passes, we kind of, although it's complex, we know how to deal with that. We come alongside them, we provide some grief counselling, some emotional support, there are resources, family will rally. When a mum goes to prison, the child is experiencing that same sort of grief, but we don't know what to do with it, and we don't know how to talk about it, and we don't have resources in place for it. And so often the child is left in a world of pain.
You said they're less likely to come and visit. Yeah,
well, when dad goes to prison, mum will often be the one who will bring the child because she understands the value of those relationships and the value of connection. And so she'll bring a child to see dad to continue sort of building that attachment and building that relationship. But when a mum goes to prison, dad's much less likely to make that happen. Sometimes dad and mum are in prison at the same time. Carers are a lot less likely to take a child to visit a parent in prison, particularly post-COVID. We found even less so. It's been a lot harder to get people to bring kids in to see their mums in prison for a visit.
Yeah, right. So that must be terribly difficult.
Yes.
So they really do face a whole range of things. Now, you told me a very interesting statistic, which is like, it's a bit of course it is statistic, but it's nice to hear the number. What percentage of people who go to prison come out again?
Oh, 98%. Yeah. It's such a kind of a no-brainer stat, but when you sit with it and think about that, it's fascinating to think that pretty much almost all but 2%, only 2% are going to do a life sentence. Everyone else is coming out. So we're putting people in, and it's a massive disruption to their lives, obviously. And, you know, like I said, it's polarizing. So some people are like, well, yes, do the crime, do the time. But when a person comes out of prison, it's kind of like a life sentence, even though they've done the time, because their life has been so disrupted in terms of you're not going to get a job with a police check. You're not going to get a rental agreement with a police check. You've got to get your Medicare again. You've got to get a license again. Yeah. And there are just so many hurdles to being able to actually reintegrate into community that the rate of recidivism incredibly high. So I think the rate of recidivism, that's the rate at which someone goes back to prison after being released,
right,
is around 50%.
Wow.
So almost half of people who go in are going to go back.
Yep.
And it's because we don't really have the supports and the systems in place to help integrate someone out of prison.
Once they come out again.
Once they come out.
Yeah, so that's the alarming bit, because I think deep down, and I said this to you before, deep down we all want those people to be, let's use the term, rehabilitated.
Yes.
Because that's the whole thing. But we are very quick to say throw the book.
Yeah.
Throw the book and put that problem away somewhere.
Yeah.
Send the problem away. But they're people, and then when they come out again,
yeah,
it's very difficult for them to do anything. There's a sort of a tongue-in-cheek joke that's saying that, you know, it's as useful as a prior conviction.
Yeah.
You know, that thing is as useful as a prior conviction, which you can...
It's not going to serve you well.
No.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've got people who go to prison. Now, these are going to be all sorts of people, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we see stuff on TV. We've got so many lawyer shows and so many... Obviously, there's a whole heap of different scenarios why people go to prison. Is there common trends around which women end up in prison?
Yeah, there is. And I think it's good to probably address that orange is the new black is not what prison looks like in Victoria.
Well, it's not even orange.
No, it's blue.
They wear blue. Blue is the new black.
Blue is the new black.
Yeah.
And you know, it's certainly not glamorous. But it's not what people envisage. And so I think probably there's a lot of misinformation around. So just to provide some context, within Victoria we have 2 prisons. 2 prisons
for women?
For women.
Yep.
There's 12 to 14 prisons for men. And some of those they open and close, some are private, some are public. And the men bounce around a fair bit around those prisons for different reasons. Whereas for the women's prisons, they all start at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, which we call DPFC. That's our maximum security prison.
That's in
women.
Ravenhall.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, just off the freeway.
Off the freeway.
Yep.
And every woman who goes to jail in Victoria is going to go to DPFC in the first instance. And then there's sort of a number of different areas within the prison that they'll be allocated as an area in which to live, different units in which they're able to serve their sentence. If they've been sentenced, a lot of women, 50% of women going to prison at the moment are on remand, which means they're not sentenced.
Oh.
And that's because of the change of bail laws, and that's why numbers of women in prison or people in prison have gone up because...
You're right. So they haven't yet been sentenced. They're just waiting for sentencing or...
Correct. They're waiting for sentencing, and sometimes that can take a while. So about half of the women in prison at the moment on remand haven't been sentenced yet.
Right.
And so, as you can imagine, they've not even been sentenced yet. They've not even been, been guilty, and already their life has been disrupted, and they've got to get back into community. So it can be complicated.
Yeah.
And then if a woman is on a particular, being convicted of a certain offence that's deemed low risk, or the woman is deemed low risk, or she's doing really well, she'll be sent to the low security prison, which is close to Bendigo, called Tarrangower.
Sure.
Yeah, so typically the greatest number of women in prison statistically are there for drug-related offences. Unlike the men's prisons, most women who are in prison have not been involved in sort of violent acts or those sorts of crimes. Typically they are drug-related.
Yep.
87%, I think the last research project that was done in Victorian prison, 80% of women have been a victim themselves of violence or abuse.
Oh, okay.
About 40% have been homeless. Masses have experienced mental health issues. So we often call prison a really expensive rehab centre or mental health institute because it's because of the cycle of those things that where they're unable to kind of get the support that they need, they end up going into doing some undesirable kind of behaviours that end them up in prison.
Yeah, okay. So that's a little bit of a trend, although you still do have, although trauma is very common.
Yes.
Actually, there was a huge statistic around trauma.
Yeah, it's around 90% of women have experienced trauma, so or complex trauma. So that is from those sorts of disadvantage, homelessness, abuse, violence.
Yep.
And then we kind of have some in-house kind of unofficial statistics that once a woman's been in prison,
it's 100%.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it like to be in prison? I mean, you guys are visiting weekly. What's it like in there? What's the environment like?
We're there. I think we're there about 4 times a week. The team are there across DPFC around 4 times a week.
Right.
It is interesting because we're there so often. We actually have to keep reminding our staff, and we have a large volunteer base. So we've got about 80 volunteers that will serve across our different programs.
Yeah, right.
That this is a maximum security prison.
Yeah.
And so there is, because we've been around for a really long time, we have a high level of trust and credibility within the prison.
I see.
And so we have freedom, although obviously all within the bounds of the way the prison operates. We do have some freedom and trust in our programs, which is really good. It's the innate, this is not a criticism of the prisons per se, just the innate nature of imprisonment is very dehumanising.
Yep.
So it's a really difficult place. It's I think there's certainly been moves towards, particularly around the women's prisons, for corrections to be more trauma informed and to seek ways to be more trauma informed with the women that are there. But it's a very challenging, very dark, very difficult place. One of the women said to us that prison feels like a barren tree without any leaves or any branches. It just feels dead all the time. And she was saying that to us because she was saying, when you guys come in, it feels like it's spring just for those couple of hours.
Yeah.
It feels like it's spring and it feels like there's some life, but in between those moments, it can just feel very hard and very dead, and a lot of nothing. So all women will work or study in prison. They will all have jobs that they have to go to or study that they have to do every day.
Yeah, right.
And then they finish sort of early afternoon and then kind of just sit with the difficulty the rest of the time. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that can really bring a person down.
Yeah.
And I imagine if you were left in that environment for any period of time, but especially a long period of time, and then you were to then try and reestablish yourself outside after your sentence is finished, you'd be a very different person.
Yeah, you would be. And you lose hope. I mean, almost every woman you talk to and you say, how are you feeling about getting out, if they're getting out? For us, we may go, you would just think, they'd be like, can't wait. But the answer is inevitably every time I'm crapping myself.
Yeah.
I'm petrified of getting out. And it feels like a bit of a brick around their neck with stigma and shame and guilt and all the stuff that they're carrying. So they often, some women will talk about it feels like even if no one knows, it still feels like they've got their CRN, which is your criminal reference number, tattooed across their forehead.
Sure.
So they just feel like everybody kind of knows. And so trying to navigate the complexities of the system, the complexities of trying to rebuild your life. If you've ever been in a situation where everything's gone wrong for you and you've got to try and find a way to build, how challenging that is, but compounded with the shame and the guilt that you feel. Because these women aren't hardened criminals that we imagine in our minds.
Yep.
You know, they're struggling with guilt and remorse, and they know the impact they've had on their families and the impact they've had on their children and the impact they've had on victims. And so trying to navigate all of that,
Yep.
and then all the natural roadblocks that are now put in their way because they've been incarcerated, and then also just the difficulty of the system itself, it can feel like a really hard mountain to climb.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard enough to get a rental property anyway.
100%.
Let alone
you're
with a bad record.
Good luck. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
That's really interesting. So what you guys do is you go into the prison and you provide activities and things for them to do.
Yeah.
Hope and joy inducing activities.
Yeah.
You were saying craft is the most popular.
Look, craft is a funny one. And I think I mentioned this to you, but
You were going to knock craft on the head.
I thought craft's got to go. When I started, my background just prior to that was around social impact and really measuring the impact of programs. And so I went in this new role in the midst of COVID. So hadn't seen it firsthand, but was just understanding, what we did as an organisation. And when I heard craft in my head, I was like, well, that will be the first thing to go, and we'll replace it with something really, impactful, deeply impactful program. And the team and our lived experience panel, because we've got a panel of women who have been incarcerated who provide us advice regularly.
Wow. That's great.
And they were like, just have a look at it.
Go and have a look.
Just give it a go. When you're back in, just let it run and see. And it was fascinating to watch. So the programs we run are fitness and craft and sports, and like you say, those joy-inducing sort of trust-building kind of programs. And craft is just a great opportunity where the woman can come along. It is the most popular program in the prison. We have a waiting list almost every week. The women sort of
a waiting list for the craft.
Come in and then they have to line up and then they wait and they come back later. Can we get in yet? Can we come and do the craft yet? And so it's got a huge following. And often it's funny because some of the women inside, if you say, hey, do you guys know Prison Network? They'd be like, oh, I'm not sure. And you go, do you know the craft ladies? And they'd be like, oh, yeah.
I love the craft
ladies.
We
love the craft ladies.
Yeah.
And so we have a whole group of volunteers just sitting there around tables with positive, meaningful things to do and to make and to create.
Yep.
Things that the woman can take back to their room to make their room feel like this is somewhere that's
a bit more homely.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's for me.
Yep.
And restore some of that humanity.
Yeah.
Some of the women will use it as an opportunity to make something for their child and will send it to their child or give it to their child at a visit as a gift. And again, it restores that agency and autonomy. I can make something meaningful. This is from me for you.
Yep.
And so that's really special, but it's also just a great opportunity to sit and chat to people just like Myrtle did, our founder, 80 years ago.
Yeah.
Who looks at them with kindness and compassion and no judgment and says, no, let's just talk like people, know what, and then there's chats about kids and there's chats about teenagers being difficult and there's, just beautiful sort of community opportunities. So all of those things foster what we call preconditions for change. So when we started doing our impact evaluation and started looking at, is this an impactful program? It turns out it really is, because it's from that place that they start to build trust with Prison Network, engage with some of our support services and start to build the preconditions for change, which are things like confidence and hope. And that ultimately is what gives them a bit of a platform for when it is time to be released, that A, they've engaged with someone who's providing them support, and B, believe that better is possible.
Yeah.
And some of the words that some of the women will use are things like, you guys gave us courage, you give us courage, you make us brave. And it doesn't get much better than that, someone believe with them that they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course they can.
Of course they can.
Because they're people like everyone else.
If they have help.
Yeah.
If they have help.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's other challenges. These are the things that we don't, this is where this is probably I'm going to test you here to get down to the mundane, because the things that we take for granted every single day are things that you've got to relearn. The first thing that comes to mind is if you've been in prison for more than 3.5 days, there's going to be a new mobile phone.
True.
There's going to be new technology.
True.
Technology comes so quick that if you've served a 5-year sentence, you're going to be...
It's a whole new world.
It is.
Yeah.
So things like you were talking about, you help them when they come out, you help them find, like even doing things like find and connecting mobile phones.
Yes. And that's one of the first things is finding a point of connection, getting them a mobile phone and getting them connected. And just sort of those basic things. But I was talking to a woman not long ago who had been in for a long time. When she came out, the smartphone was a thing.
Oh, the BlackBerry was gone.
The smartphone had never been a thing for her. And so the whole world feels like it's changed. Everything feels different. And there are some supports for women who meet a certain criteria. There is sort of government-funded support for 3 months when someone comes out.
Yep.
But there are some women who don't meet the criteria because maybe they have a family member who will, they can live with, or there are different supports in place, and so they're not going to get any government-funded support. We often provide support for those women and fill that gap because they'll tell us, and this woman was one of those, even though she wasn't eligible for support, her family didn't understand what she had experienced and what she had gone through, so the trauma of that. And then just how to re-engage services and how to get your license again because your license would have expired and your Medicare expired. And so there's so many bank accounts. How do you get a bank account again, and how do you navigate that, and even the connectivity of them saying, okay, do this and that online. But if you don't have online and if you've never used online.
Yeah, what's online? Yeah.
That's right. We're busy making a calendar that we'll be giving the women for Christmas. Every year we give them, every woman in prison. We're very fortunate. Like I said, we've got great credibility and trust. So we were able to provide a gift for every woman in prison. Obviously corrections, checks that and approves all of that. And so within that gift, there's a number of different things that are just real treats for them, like coffee and tea and chocolate and, journal. But we give them a calendar. And this year we're designing our own calendar, and some of the feedback we've gotten from some of the women in our lived experience panel and in prison is to put within the calendar stuff that they would love to Google but they can't, particularly around cooking, because there are some areas within the prison that the women are allowed to cook for themselves. So how do you convert a cup of flour into mils, or how do you convert mils into this? And, simple things that we're so used to hopping on our phone, doing a quick Google to get the information we need. They don't have access to any of that. So we're going to provide them a little cheat list of things they may Google when it comes to cooking.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
That's really
the little
interesting.
Things. Yeah.
So you've got you've got a mobile phone and, you can call people, but what's next? I mean, you need more than that. You're looking for like housing and you need some sort of employment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that housing and employment are key to reducing recidivism. It's a no-brainer.
Yep.
And so we as Prison Network have really had to push into those areas. So in some ways, COVID was a bit of a gift to us. Certainly it was challenging because we couldn't go into prison and run our programs like we normally would. And it was very difficult for the women who were in prison because, of course, for more than 2 years, they didn't have visitors or contact with their children. So that was incredibly difficult. And we had to figure out how to navigate that. But it also was a gift in that it gave us some space and capacity to really think about and push into our post-release areas of work. We had done some post-release support, but really hadn't done huge amounts in the areas of housing and employment, had done a lot of trying to do referrals, trying to find avenues and supports that are already available. And to be honest, it's been a bit hit and miss. The problem is there just isn't property. The houses aren't there, so it doesn't matter what partnership you have. You can't find a house for a woman. And there are a lot of agencies that do a lot of stuff like preparing a woman for employment in terms of helping her do her resume or, giving her clothes to go for the interviews. But in terms of actually helping her get the job, managing the process of whether there's a police check or if there isn't a police check, and then once she gets the job, And if she gets the job, which in itself is a miracle, but if she does, then how do you navigate the fact that she's got an ankle bracelet and she's going to have a parole visit once a week and she's going to have to take urine samples every week. And so there are so many roadblocks. So how do you, I don't know if you've ever gotten a new job and you've got to tell your employer you've got to go on holiday. You'd love the job, but you've got a holiday planned in 6 months.
Yeah,
it's awkward
it is.
and weird. So imagine having to try and have that conversation with an employer.
It'd be so hard.
It's so hard. And so we kind of take on that role in that we are the advocate for the woman, but we're also a safety net for the employer and can provide some support for the employer around how to manage your staff and your team, how to create a thoughtful work environment so that a woman can integrate into that. And then we've also done some work in housing. So we don't necessarily want to be a housing agency. We don't want to be an employment agency, but for us to do support well, which is what we're there for, that is who we are. We're about support. For us to do that well, those are really important pieces of the puzzle. And I think we've had around 20 women in our housing program, in our More Than a Home program. And we call it More Than a Home because it's just that. It's more than a place to sleep. We furnish it like a home. We ensure that it's safe and secure, and we include wraparound support. So a support worker who's going to be there for those catastrophic, hectic first 3 months, but then also journey with you beyond that. And of the 20 women that we've supported through that program, only one's gone back, which is around 5% recidivism rate versus the 50% recidivism rate that we see as the standard. So it's certainly having an impact. And I know stats are interesting and fascinating. Some people think with their head and some people think with their heart. And so it's probably good that I give you a bit of a story that best illustrates what that looks like for a person.
Yeah, like a real person.
A real person. How does that translate? And so I'll share a story with you about a woman that we're going to call Vanessa. Obviously, we're de-identifying her for her own safety. But she had a story that sadly is not really unique. And so I could probably tell you 100 stories that would sound very similar in terms of this is kind of what happens for women and how they end up on the trajectory. So Vanessa
sort of represents quite a lot of people.
She really does, yeah. And so she she would say, a really lovely childhood, a beautiful mum who loved her and provided for her and her brother. Dad wasn't really in the picture. And then tragically, her mum had a terrible car accident, was unable to really care for the kids very well and ended up getting a carer herself, who ended up abusing the children, sexually and violently, and it was pretty awful. And so there wasn't much support available for her in that instance, or more broadly. Dad said that the boy could come and live with him, but he wanted nothing to do with Vanessa. He didn't have space in his home for her. So she had nowhere to turn and ended up on the streets at around 13 years of age, was homeless for a number of years, went through lots of different systems, couldn't quite get the support that she needed. If we had 2 hours to tell you sort of the ups and downs of the things that she had to go through, it's kind of like, we call it, internally, we use an analogy of a pinball machine where, for people like us, maybe there are lots of moments of trajectory changing sort of opportunities that mean we have the opportunities we have, so parents that care for you, or a good education, or someone has provided you some support, and kind of all of those kind of things kind of ping you up. But for a lot of the women we work with, it kind of feels like they've just got things in their lives that are just pinging them down.
It's the opposite.
And so every time they feel like they get on their feet, something happens that's catastrophic. And so for her, after a series of difficult things, ended up in an abusive relationship with a man who she thought would be safe, who would look after her, and after not being looked after for a long time, that felt like a really good idea. And they had a child together, but the relationship turned toxic. He became violent, and I think there was some drugs and alcohol and gambling involved that made things pretty nasty. And so she started to numb herself with drugs and alcohol,
Substance.
which is often, we talk about trauma a lot, obviously because of the cohort of women we work with, but knowing that when it comes to trauma, what people will do when they've experienced complex trauma is they'll look for adaptations, which is basically ways in which to cope.
Yep.
And those things all have a function. So alcohol or drugs or self-harm or high-risk behaviour. And the functions of those things are like control and belonging and numbing.
Yep.
And so it's pretty standard that people who have experienced trauma will end up abusing substance in some way.
Yep.
And then bad things happen when you're higher on drugs.
It just seems to be the pathway.
Yeah, that's right. And she found herself in jail, and she found herself in a very dark and sad place, and she was devastated to be separated from her child, and really didn't feel like she had any hope. And so we found her in the craft program, making something for her daughter.
Yep.
Wanting to just hear a little bit more about some of the services that we could provide for her. So we started to provide her some with one-on-one support just to help her figure out how to navigate being in prison and how to start thinking about rebuilding your life when you leave. And then also, no one would bring her child to come and see her on the weekends.
Yep.
So we were able to offer that service, which is part of our Keeping Kids Connected program, that we'll provide transport for mums,
Yep.
drive kids in, and then facilitate a visit in our Fun with Mum program that happens every Sunday, which is really an opportunity for mums and their kids to have sort of meaningful moments together through activities and games and a bit of a program that just takes the challenge and the difficulty of a child coming into a prison environment away and provides opportunities for them to connect and have those meaningful moments that we may have, over cereal, incidentally, with our children, but they don't have the opportunity to have that.
Yep.
And so that was very helpful for her. And through those programs, we started to see her confidence build. We started to see her feeling more positive about life, more hopeful about the future. One of the biggest hurdles for her was that she didn't have a home to go to, which is the case for almost every woman we speak to in prison.
Yep.
A lot of them don't have a home to go to. They can't go back from where
they came from.
Because that was the problem in the first place.
Yeah, it was the catalyst.
And sometimes they just don't have homes available to them at all. And so that can be really difficult for a lot of women. And ultimately, the sort of the long-term solutions for a woman who just can't find housing may be something like a boarding house or shared homes. And then you're going into an environment where there's a lot of toxic behaviour.
I see. Yeah, it's not necessarily that healthy for them.
It's not a healthy environment. There's abuse happening in those environments, and often there's men and women. It's co-ed. And for a woman who's experienced trauma from a man, that can be very triggering and difficult for her.
It'd be real hard, yeah.
So it's hard to build from.
Yep.
And so often when people go into those situations, you'll find that they come back into prison relatively quickly after.
Okay.
So we were able to offer her a home and help her get connected in with employment. And she'll say the words, it's been life-changing for her, literally completely changed her life, not just kind of redeeming, for want of a better word, what's happened in prison, but everything that came before, just giving her a new and positive life and opportunities. And so our housing program, normally we operate that for about 12 months. Someone will come in for about 12 months. That's how long it takes.
Yep.
Some people will be there for 6 months and they're good to go. For her, it was a bit longer because, it was difficult to get access and custody for her child. But once she did that and she had a job and she's been promoted and everybody loves her at work and she's got a company car and she's valued and appreciated, she's on some of our advisory panels now.
Yep.
And will often come and speak at events that we present at. We know that we can create that sort of change.
Yeah.
And so I know your podcast is about good news.
Yep.
The good news is that although it can feel pretty bleak,
yep,
and it can look very difficult, we know that there are key, really concrete things that we can do that can change that trajectory,
yep,
and can break that cycle of incarceration and disadvantage. And I think that's what's key, is not just the difference it's making for Vanessa, but the difference it's making for her child. Because statistically, we know if a parent's been incarcerated, the likelihood of their child being incarcerated goes up. And so we're wanting to sort of break and disrupt those cycles of incarceration.
Yep.
And we also know for corrections to keep a woman, or the government to keep a woman in prison for a year, is around $160,000
per prisoner per year.
Per prison per year.
Yep.
Our housing program, which we often struggle to get funding for, because I think philanthropy can sometimes look at it and go, I don't know if that's a good investment for one person.
Yep.
So it cost us around $20,000 for the home itself, and then around $30,000 for all the wraparound support for a year. So that's $50,000 for one person.
Yep.
And some would go, well, is that a really good return on investment, $50,000 to change one life? And for us, we found it absolutely to be the case.
Yep.
Because it's not just changing their lives, it's changing the lives of their children and their families and their communities. And the ripple effect of that is phenomenal. And it's still a third of the cost of what it's going to cost if we send her back to prison.
Yeah, so that's right. So it's a third of the price, and you get the benefit of the ripple effect at the other side.
Long-term change. Yeah, long-term sustainable change.
Because 98% of prisoners come out again.
Coming out.
Yeah.
100%.
And so that's what...
And 50% of those are going back in.
Yeah. So if you can circuit break that trend...
Yes.
And if you can give them hope and joy and some purpose...
Yes.
Then the results are going to be...
phenomenal.
Also unsurprising. I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, that's right. 100%.
Yeah.
And yet it seems so logical.
Yeah.
But so hard to do.
Yeah, I imagine it's very, very tricky.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've got some questions about you. I mean, if anyone's been paying close attention, they've probably heard a little tweak of an accent coming through. It's not real strong anymore.
No.
But it's still there a little.
It's hard. It makes an appearance every now and again.
It's a South African accent.
It is a South African accent.
Yes.
I've been here for about 24 years.
Yes.
I used to say years.
Years.
24 years.
Yes.
But you're right. The accent has dulled, except when I'm on the phone to my mother.
Oh, yeah.
Then I sound exactly like I used to.
Yeah, you slip straight back in.
You can't help yourself. Yeah.
And so what brought you to Australia?
It was actually a family decision.
Yep.
So we all, I was a teacher back in South Africa, and I think have always, probably just because of the way I was raised, and because in South Africa you're faced with disadvantage and pain, kind of, it's in your face all the time.
Right.
So sort of had a really strong social justice kind of mindset, or social conscious, I suppose.
Yep.
And so I was really involved I was a teacher there, and involved in sort of numeracy and literacy school for adults in squatter camps that we started up there. And that was great, and it kind of was it was difficult to leave. I think I was enjoying what we were doing there.
We were doing some good there.
Yeah, we were doing some good, and it felt good.
Yep.
And it felt like we were making change, but the family wanted to all sort of move together.
Yeah.
And so we came along and did that about 24 years ago.
Was that so with your parents?
With my parents
Yep.
and my sister and my husband, and we had a son at that point as well.
Oh, right. So everyone came.
Everyone came.
Oh. And so then you came to Australia, and then at some point you've decided to switch out of what you were doing to sort of head towards what you're doing now. Like, what was there a sort of a moment in time that made you want to change and get into this?
I think lots of little moments in time. I think just, like I said, always wanting to do good, and then doing good with what I knew and how I knew it, and the opportunities that I had in front of me.
Yep.
And as I knew more and had different opportunities, I kind of moved into different spaces.
Yep.
So coming from South Africa, would have to have done some training to teach again, and just didn't really want to teach in suburban kind of schools. I found it really challenging. It was a culture shock coming from seeing sort of the difficulties and pain around you in your face all the time from a country like South Africa to a country like Australia, where it's harder to see. And I think in the first instance when I got here, probably naively thought, oh, well, nobody needs anything here. Everybody's got it together.
Everyone's fine.
I think as I've been here longer and grown up, and gotten older, you realise that as you scratch the surface, there's a lot of challenges and difficulties everywhere. It's just trying to see where you're best placed to provide support. And so I wasn't sure what that looked like for me. I served as a minister of religion for a number of years and started studying and did a couple of degrees. One of those, it was a master's in theology.
Yep.
And that led me into lecturing and teaching in that area. And I think sort of got to a point where I've kind of got an affinity for leadership. So I was vice president of the organisation that I was teaching at as well. But realised that I'd gotten, even though for me it was all about doing good, had kind of gotten further and further away from the front line. And so wanted to move from just talking about it or teaching about it to really doing it.
Yep.
And the transition was a lot harder than I thought. I was maybe a little bit arrogant. I, resigned and went for a couple of roles as CEOs of sort of small charities, thinking, of course they'll want me.
Yep.
Life humbles you.
Yes.
In many ways.
Is this another craft incident? Are we?
My life is full of craft incidents, assumptions that get challenged, and that's good because we want to be learning, and that's what I mean. When you know better, then you kind of want to do better.
So you learn and grow.
That's right, and so you want to be teachable, and you want to be a lifelong learner. And for me, I got to a point where I wanted to serve and I wanted to lead, and so I think I was sort of top two in 6 months. It was kind of very humbling. Went for lots of different roles and sort of was top two in all of them, but didn't get any of them.
Sure.
And the key criticism, I suppose, was around the fact that a lot of these charities needed funding and they needed it fast. And I didn't have any background in funding.
Chasing funding.
Yeah. And you would have interviews and they would say, look, we need $100,000 in the next 6 months. Do you think you could make that happen? And I didn't know if I could. I had no experience in that.
Yep.
But it did make me go, wow, charities really are on the starvation cycle where they're doing good work, but there's so much
they have a very clear
stress.
runway.
Yeah, they really do. And there's a lot of pressure on the CEO to make sure that good work continues by ensuring that there's constantly funding coming through the door.
Yeah, and charities are expensive.
And good work is expensive. I mean, everything's expensive in terms of employment, and charities are no different.
The unfortunate thing about charities is that they do a lot of giving.
Yes.
Which is tough for the bottom line.
Yeah.
Which is
the cycle. Which is what they're there, what they exist for.
Yeah, exactly.
And so sort of you could probably see a trend in my life. I really value education.
Yep.
And every time there's an inflection point, I kind of tend to go back to that point and go, okay, I need to know more.
Yep.
And so I went and did some more studies. So I got a grad dip in research methodology and then a grad dip in social impact and investment. So from Swinburne. So understanding how and what social impact looks like and where we find the money for it.
Yeah, okay.
And that for me was really important to kind of marry my theological understandings and framework and have a cross-disciplinary and kind of approach to go, okay, but and what do we know? How do we do that and what's best practice? And so that kind of pushed me into the space of really starting to challenge assumptions around, is the work that we're doing actually creating impact, or we're just doing it because that's what we do?
Yep.
And so I worked with heaps of different charities around creating frameworks for them to think about and measure their impact. And that led to an opportunity to work with a group in Darwin for a number of years around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health research. And health research is tricky because unless it's translated into practice, the impact can be quite vague.
Yep.
And so I was sort of brought on to work with some of the teams and work with some of the researchers in how to think about their work and how to present their work to philanthropy. And part of that was working with women specifically, actually. Across all STEM, there's a real underrepresentation of women in leadership.
Sure.
And so we developed, with the help of the Northern Territory government funding, we developed a whole lot of mentorship programs and coaching programs for women in research in regional remote areas.
Yep.
And that again kind of sort of enlightened me to, geez, when we empower women, it really is phenomenal what they can do.
Yep.
And how, whether it's a woman in prison or it's a woman who's at the top of her game with a PhD working in research, kicking goals,
Yep.
there are still some of these things that we all kind of grapple with.
Yep.
Around trusting ourselves and confidence and all those preconditions for, creating the life that you want, I suppose, without sounding a little bit corny.
Yep.
And so it was during that time that a role at Prison Network came available. And again, I had sort of moved. I was working in this role with the organisation in Darwin, but because I was commuting, again, I kind of felt this distance, and I really wanted to be in the weeds of a thing. I wanted to be on the ground, on the front line.
Yep.
And so then this opportunity came for Prison Network, which again was being able to speak for and on behalf of a marginalised people group, which are these women, these vulnerable women, knowing the impact that they can have in their worlds, in their lives, in their families, if they get some support. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for me to move into that role.
And you took that on at the start of COVID.
Yes, we were in stage 3, and then the week I started, we moved to stage 4.
Right.
So during stage 3, we still had support workers going into prison.
Oh, okay.
Stage 4, everything stopped.
Yeah.
There was no going in. And of course, as you would know, no seeing each other. So I took on the role, and then for the first 2 years couldn't actually see what we did in prison.
Was that challenging?
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult.
Yep.
But it was also, like I said, a gift in that we could focus on other things. We could get a lot of operational, internal stuff done. Stuff
that maybe wouldn't have got done otherwise.
The not sexy stuff that creates a really good framework for growth.
Yep.
You know, all the forward thinking
planning
stuff, planning and policies and all of that sort of stuff. Really important work.
Yep.
And it also created space for us to really focus on post-release. And so now, post-COVID, I think we're about a year into having everything operating.
Yep.
So we're about a year into having our programs in prison all back at full steam. And we also are able to now provide this continuity of care from women coming in from remand all the way through when they're released, and then into a really robust post-release program that's seeing some exciting results. So COVID was hard, but good for us,
but also
in some ways.
Some silver lining. And so something you've kind of almost touched on there, you not only help people who are currently in prison, you sometimes also help people who are not yet in prison or haven't been sentenced.
Yeah, it's probably not our biggest area of work around the preventative stuff, but certainly sometimes we would provide advice or support to someone who may be going to jail.
Yeah, so that's the way it looks like it's heading.
Yeah,
because of the situation.
Yeah,
and some of these situations are. I mean, we've talked that you've got people who have sort of slipped down a slippery slope of substance and things like that, but for other people, it's just a moment in time and a mistake.
Yeah,
a life-changing mistake.
Yeah,
you know,
and particularly around your offences like dangerous driving,
traffic and things like that, which is a
culpable driving. I mean, culpable driving is different because I suppose that there's some sort of intent there, maybe.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, we know of people who have had a lapse of concentration.
Yep.
Caused a serious accident that may have caused death.
Yep.
A jail is a very difficult place for them to come to terms with that because they're experiencing a whole lot of trauma in terms of the fact that they've caused a death in the first instance.
Before the accident, they were average Jane.
Yeah, that's right.
And sometimes really successful Jane.
Living, laugh,
succeeding, winning, contributing to community.
Correct.
All of the bits.
Correct.
And then
it doesn't take much.
Yeah, and a moment in time, and next thing, and you know that's about responsibility as well. You know, it's your responsibility, especially motor vehicles and things like that. You're in charge.
Yes. But it's like I said, it's a huge cost to pay.
Yeah.
Particularly because it's not just the prison sentence.
Yes.
It is almost a life sentence.
Yeah.
In terms of the consequence from even when you get out.
Your entire life changes.
Yep. You know, and a lot of the volunteers that we've got, it's funny if you ask people, you know, why they're involved and what it means to them, a lot of us will say it could have been me. Like at any moment that could have been me. And so that I think just being really humble around that, it's not really an us and them. It's just
well, I think on the if you think using the road as an example, I think everyone's had if everyone who's been driving for at least a little while, they could all say there was a moment where, geez, I nearly
Yeah, whoops.
You know,
Yep.
kid runs out from somewhere or I just didn't see that cyclist.
Yeah. And it's
all
really,
that sort of stuff.
And it's really about the consequence because, you know, I know of people who've gotten wasted and driven into a wall.
Yes.
And they may lose their license.
Yes.
But they're not going to go to jail
No.
because no life has been lost and there's no
that's
injury
right.
there.
Yeah, it's what was it, like civil?
Yeah,
civil
that's right.
Problems, yeah.
Yeah. So, but someone who has a lapse of judgment and there is an injury,
You get
or worst
distracted,
case,
next thing you know.
a death.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, prison sentences.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's tricky.
I imagine it'd be very difficult.
Mm.
Yeah. So what you're doing is really important. And that's why I really, once I realised what it is that you did,
Yeah.
I thought this is something that we all need to talk about. And the big takeaways for me are most of them come out again.
Yeah.
And that we don't want people to come out of prison and then have no purpose. And, you know, we all want rehabilitation.
Yeah.
But I don't think we think about it. I think we
yeah.
think about it's like a valve,
Yes.
one way.
Yes.
Throw the books, see you later.
Yeah.
Problem's gone.
Yeah.
But now, there is very much a thing for them to deal with afterwards.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So have you got so funding? Obviously, you've got to think about funding constantly.
Yes.
How do you get funded for this?
So we're philanthropically funded mostly. So we have a lot of grants and foundations that support our work. A lot of major donors who are sympathetic to the work that we do, and then we'll provide funding for that. And then because we've been around for so long, 80 years, there's a lot of old ladies.
Oh, yeah.
Friends of Myrtle.
Oh.
Who send us checks every month to say, keep up the good work, keep up the good work. And all of those little bits really make a massive difference to enable us to do our work.
So general public can volunteer. Can donate. Yep.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah. We run a couple of campaigns a year where we really reach out for funding. So normally Giving Tuesday, which is in November.
Okay.
End of financial year appeal. We'll do a big appeal. But yes, of course, we're always happy to receive any funding that can go into one of the programs that we do.
Yeah. Well, I really hope that you can keep the funding coming.
Yeah, me too.
Because I mean, if you think bigger picture, the funding is saving money.
Yes, and I think for us, really, the big focus for us now is gathering evidence and evaluation to actually demonstrate that the work that we're doing is creating that sort of change.
That's the hard bit, right?
That's the hard bit, but once we have that and we're close, it's about, for long-term change, you need system change, you need policy change.
Yep.
And so it's about working out how we collaborate and work with people to try and change policy, change thinking.
Yep.
Around the best way to support these people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I guess the irony of all of that is that costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does. But there are good forward-thinking philanthropists, which we've been fortunate enough to find, who are prepared to put the funds into things like evaluations because they understand that's a sustainable that creates sustainability.
Yes.
Because if we can understand the impact we're having, that therefore opens up doors to continue to do the work.
Yes.
That's a really good long-term approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And any other projects within Prison Network that you can mention? Anything on the cards?
Look, at the moment we really are. I think for the next year our focus will continue to be housing.
Yep.
Because it's just unrelenting in terms of the need.
Yep.
And as a result really of the inquest to children who have a parent who's incarcerated, we know more and understand more and are able to fill some of those gaps now. So for the next year, really are going to be focusing on our Keeping Kids Connected program.
Sure. Oh, well, it's certainly worth putting time and energy into that.
Yeah.
That's very important. I think because the breaking the cycle part.
Correct. And that's what it's about for us for the long term.
Yeah.
Is to really try and break that cycle of incarceration and of disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, I guess thank you so much for coming and telling your story and telling us about Prison Network. It's something that I'll keep an eye on, definitely, because I think it's really important. And like I say, it's just something that I feel like we only see the first half of.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's so much misunderstanding and misinformation around it. You know, often when I bump into people, you know, dinner parties, and they say, "What do you do?"
Yep.
It often opens up incredible discussion because people are interested to know.
Yep.
And don't really know how to ask.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot that we don't understand because all we can see is what's on TV, and that's not always accurate. And so I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story, and particularly for me, you know, like I said, one of the key drivers for us is disrupting that cycle of incarceration, but also to remove some of the stigma around what it means and what it's been like for a woman who's been in prison.
Yep.
So that she's just got a little bit more support in community around trying to rehabilitate.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want is the rehabilitation.
100%. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you
for coming on the Good People podcast. Amelia Pickering, CEO of Prison Network, and you can find you guys at prisonnetwork.org.au. I think I've got that right there. prisonnetwork.org.au. You can read all about what they do, look at their work, their impact. There is so the volunteer section as well. You can go and have a read about that. So please go and check it out. And let's see if you can keep on keeping on making the change.
Let's hope so. Another 80 years, I reckon.
Yeah, another 80. You'll be
well
Myrtle.
until we
Are you
solve
gonna
the
be Myrtle?
problem. Yeah. 80 years or until we've solved the problem,
Until
whichever
we
comes
solve it.
first.
Yeah, well, I hope you solve it.
Yeah. So do we.
But I think it's going to be quite a challenge for you. So
Yeah.
good luck for
Thank
that.
you. Thanks for having me, Andy.
You're welcome. This has been the Good People podcast, brought to you by In Other Good News. And feel free to, if you're watching this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out so much when you hit those buttons. Helps more people see and hear what we do. And it also helps us to grow and keep putting on the show. So thank you. Please do that. Or follow, like on Apple Podcasts, you can, follow the show there as well, things like that. Please do that. But until next time, this has been the Good People podcast. My name is Andy, and it's all brought to you by In Other Good News.
Well, it's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here. They're the good people from round here. Come on, let me introduce you to a few.